lot of fine old bookstores in the city of Boston, probably because this town has such a long tradition of printing. My family, the Daniels, have been printers here for more than 100 years. The first press in the American colonies was set up here in Boston back in 1638. In those days, printing was the only mass communication technology. The colonists depended heavily on printed proclamations, prayer books, songbooks, and maps. Printing technology in colonial times was essentially the same technology printing began with in the 15th century. The flatbed screw press, run by human skill and effort, could produce one beautifully printed sheet at a time. Thanks a lot. You know, as much as I admire the craftsmanship of those early printers, I'm sure glad we do things differently today. If we were still printing by hand, it would take all day just to run 300 copies of the front page of the Boston Globe. The complete newspaper would be harder to find and more expensive than any of those rare editions. And just think of all the information we'd never get. Today, printers like myself have a whole new world of technology to draw on, giving us faster, more efficient, and better quality results. Instead of printing from wooden hand presses, we have computer-driven presses, capable of printing up to 40,000 impressions an hour and in full glorious color. And the most drastic changes in the art of printing have occurred quite recently. For example, look at this. The first edition of International Paper Company's Pocket Pal. When my father printed it over 50 years ago, Pocket Pal was a very comprehensive guide to graphic arts production, and it still is. But the newest edition contains much more information because there's a lot more technology in the printing industry today than there was 50 years ago. One thing never changes, though. People put ink on paper to communicate ideas. What you're looking at is a comprehensive layout of an advertising brochure we're going to print. The brochure is designed to show off the printing quality of a new paper, Spring Hill Opaque, manufactured by International Paper Company. The comprehensive layout shows where the type will be, what kind of pictures will appear, and what the overall effect will be. I can estimate the cost of printing based on the comprehensive, but it is still only an idea. To get from this stage to the printed one involves a complicated series of steps and takes the work of several professionals, each producing a different element, as the idea begins to take shape. One essential operation is getting the manuscript typeset. Typesetting makes reading easier. The style of type chosen, called a typeface, has an impact on the graphic effect. So does the choice of type size, weight, line length, and spacing. All these instructions are marked on the manuscript. For 400 years, type was set one letter at a time, the way Gutenberg did it. In fact, Gutenberg's great invention was not the printing press, as many people think, but movable type. The letters, spaces, and other characters were locked up into a page, printed, resorted, and reused. Today, nearly all type is set electronically. The type styles, sizes, and weights have been coded so the computer can reproduce them. The operator keys in the copy along with the designer specs for sizes and weights, and the typeset copy emerges ready to be arranged according to the layout. The next very important step is the mechanical. It tells the printer what goes where and how to produce it. If it's not right, the printing won't be right. The typeset copy has been pasted on the mechanical, but the pictures you see here are just photocopies that show where the actual artwork will be reproduced. I should mention that printers use the words art or artwork to refer to everything in the layout that isn't type. Artwork is generally much more complicated to print than type. That's because most pictures are what we call continuous tone images. For example, this black and white photo is made up of hundreds of shades of gray, ranging from black to white. But it's not possible to equip a printing press with hundreds of shades of gray ink. We have to print this continuous tone photograph with one ink color, black. We create the equivalent gray tones by printing various densities of black. First, we photograph the continuous tone original through a fine screen called a halftone screen. Light passing from the image through the halftone screen to the photographic negative changes continuous tones into a pattern of dots. Light areas become tiny dots spaced far apart. Dark areas contain bigger dots closer to each other. All of our continuous tone images, whether black and white or full color, have to be screened in this way. This image, which appears to be made up of many colors, is actually composed of dots generated by the halftone process. There are many dots, but only 4 colors of dot: yellow, magenta or red, cyan or blue, and black. We call this 4-color process, and the ink colors process colors. The 4 process colors together contain all the wavelengths of visible light to give us the image as the camera or human eye sees it. But how does this translate to ink on paper, which is what printing is all about? On the press, the paper passes through 4 printing stations. Usually, the black ink is used to reproduce the type and black halftone dots. Then cyan dots go down, then magenta, and finally yellow. Let's look at how this illustration gets separated into its 4 basic colors for printing. One method of color separation is camera separation. The operator adjusts the camera to enlarge, or in this case, reduce the image. He photographs the original art through filters, which isolate 1 color per exposure. He ends up with 4 negatives, 1 for the magenta light reflected from the original, 1 for cyan, and so forth. Together, these negatives have all the color of the original. Like many of the printing crafts, the method of color separation has been changed by the computer revolution. Here is a prime example of that revolution: the laser scanner, a faster and far more precise method of color separation. The operator places transparencies or reflective art on a scanning drum. As the drum rotates, light reflected from the art is split into its component colors and converted by photocells into digital information. This information is used to drive a laser beam to generate halftone dots. Laser separations give the operator more positive control than camera separations. But the laser scanner has even greater advantages over camera separation when it comes to color correcting our proofs. Let me show you what I mean by a proof first. This is an off-press proof of our camera-separated art. It has been created by exposing special photosensitive sheets to the 4 film negatives. These sheets are laminated together to show how the color-separated art will print. This proofing process saves the expense of making plates and setting up the press itself. Invariably, there are some color corrections to be made. By comparing the color values on the proof with the colors and shades on the original, we can see here, for example, it needs more blue. I'd say about 10%. With the laser scanner, we can make changes through the computer and get new corrected negatives as quickly as we got the first. How about that? Now both the art and the manuscript copy for the brochure are in a form that can be reproduced by transferring 4 processed colors of ink to a sheet of paper. But today's printing presses print several pages, sometimes on both sides of the sheet, on a single pass through the press. After the printed sheet comes off the press, it will be folded and cut in such a way that the brochure can be put together and bound. So before our job can go to press, we have to assemble all the films we've made, both for artwork and type. This is called page makeup, and it is performed by highly skilled technicians called strippers, who literally strip together the film negatives into flats designed to fit the press. Working 1 color at a time, the stripper cuts windows in a plastic film for the areas where ink will print when the job is on press. So, 1 flat contains the black elements of several pages. Another flat will contain the blue negatives for the same pages. Where he sees flaws, he retouches. Any problem with the quality or positioning of the stripped-up flats will cause quality problems on press, added costs, and delays. The reputation for quality in a printing plant often depends on the craftsmanship of the stripping department. No wonder computer color page makeup systems are gaining quick acceptance. A computerized page makeup system allows the operator to assemble text and images very fast with exact precision without hand operations. The system separates the colors in the art as we saw before. It reads line art and type and converts everything to computer input. This computerized information can be repositioned at will. Colors can be changed. Images can be retouched. The computer data is run through an electronic dot generator which produces composite film negatives. This brochure will require dozens of negatives like this one. When the negatives are stripped, we make one final check before going to press. We make a photographic paper print of the negatives, usually called a blueprint. This is the last chance to make sure every element is there and in the right position, and that the assembled pages will be in the right order when the printed sheets are folded and trimmed. Now we're ready to go to press, but what kind of press? In my plant, as in most commercial printing plants, we print by offset lithography. How that works is easier to understand if you know how the other two major printing processes work. For 500 years, the dominant process was letterpress, the technology used by Gutenberg. A raised image, a letter for instance, was inked and pressed into the paper. Because the image is raised, letterpress is known as a relief process. In the gravure process, the image is cut or etched chemically into a metal plate or cylinder. It is called an intaglio process, from the Italian to engrave. The plate is covered with ink. A blade, called a doctor blade, removes the ink from the surface, but not from below the surface. The paper is pressed against the plate and attracts the ink. In lithography, the third major printing method, the plate is treated with chemicals so that the image area will attract the oil-based inks, and the non-image areas will attract water, which will repel ink. In lithography, the image sits right on the surface of the plate, so this is called a planographic process. Usually, the image is offset to a rubber blanket, which in turn transfers the image to the paper, passing between the blanket cylinder and the impression cylinder. Here's how we make plates for this brochure. We program a computer with the layout of the pages. This data is fed into a plate maker, which positions the negatives. The plate itself has been treated with photosensitive chemicals. The areas of the plate that are exposed to light passing through the photographic negatives change chemically so they will attract ink. Here is one of the finished plates for our brochure. The plate's own chemistry maintains the separation between image and non-image and makes high-resolution graphics possible. When this plate is put on the press, these areas will attract ink. These areas will attract water and stay clean. There are two kinds of offset lithography. Web offset, where a continuous roll or web of paper runs through the press, is suitable for long runs of standard-sized jobs. This job, a non-standard size brochure, will be printed by sheet-fed offset. The choice of paper is especially important in sheet-fed offset. A flat, square sheet that remains stable in a wet environment is needed for good runnability. Whiteness, smoothness, opacity, and surface integrity make for printability. This particular job, as I mentioned, will be printed on Spring Hill Opaque from International Paper Company. Ink selection is equally important. In this brochure, we're using a special blue on some pages in addition to the 4 process colors. We mix this special color according to a formula and match it to the chart. Proper tack or stickiness in the inks is critical in offset printing. The first ink down must be tackier than the next, and so on, so inks will adhere to each other. And the press must be inked up so ink flows evenly from the plate to the blanket to the paper. Test sheets are run until the ink density is exactly right. press setup on many of the latest presses is computer assisted. Before going to press, each printing plate is scanned and the density and value of dots on the plates is recorded. When the plate goes on press, the data goes into a press console which presets the ink fountain. As we change these settings, the adjustments are recorded. If we need to reprint the job in the future, the ink fountains can be set up exactly the same as it was for the first run. Yeah, I think we need a little bit more red here to make it closer to... Even when the press is computer controlled, many decisions on color can only be made after examining sheets as they come off the press. This final check is time consuming for both the printer and client. How does it look now, Larry?
The pine cone looks pretty good. The rocks up here have cleaned up.
Finally, the okay is given to run the job. Sheets start coming off the press at the rate of up to 10,000 impressions per hour. It takes several hours to print the first 8 pages of the brochure. Then we make ready again for the last 4 pages, and again for the cover. The on-press part of printing is the fastest moving and the most exciting. It's very satisfying for the printer to see the stacks of beautifully printed sheets in the press room. But we're not done yet. Now we can move on to the last stage of production, binding and finishing. We cut the press sheets in half, folding each half once, then again at a right angle. This gives us 2 8-page units called signatures from one press sheet. The other press sheet has 4 4-page signatures. The signatures of the text pages and the cover are now ready for binding. There are many binding methods. Saddle wire is the most practical for this brochure. The assembled booklet rests open on a saddle, while mechanical stitching heads force wires through the spine and bend them like staples. Then the edges are trimmed on the trim marks. And you know what? It's finished. And a darn good printing job it is. And it was produced faster, easier, and more economically through the use of the most up-to-date technology. Things that didn't even exist when my father retired from this business just 20 short years ago. And as the demands for information increase and new advances in computer and laser technology are applied, printing will change even more drastically by the end of this century. Which is why you'll want to get your copy of the latest edition of The Pocket Pal, a guide to graphic arts production from International Paper Company.